The sun hung low over the dusty hills of Dust Creek, painting the sky with a sorrowful amber glow. The wind rustled the brittle grass and sent tiny eddies of red dirt swirling down the main road, now more a memory than a path, just like the man they were burying today. People came quietly, hats in hand, boots scuffing the earth, voices low. No one laughed. No one dared. It was the last funeral the town would ever hold for a true cowboy. Will McGraw, wrangler, war veteran, and once the fiercest bronc rider in 3 counties, was gone. And with him, something irreplaceable felt like it had been snuffed out too. A few old-timers remembered Will in his prime. He had been lean as a fence rail, sharp-eyed, and full of grit. He wasn't loud, but his presence filled a room like thunder without lightning. Rode hard, worked harder, always alone, except for the horses he raised, broke, and trusted more than any man. The last one, Midnight, a black stallion as wild as the hills, was nowhere to be seen. And folks noticed. It didn't sit right, Will's funeral without that horse. In the crowd, a young woman stood out not because of what she wore, plain jeans, scuffed boots, a flannel shirt, but because of how tightly she held herself. Ella McGraw, Will's granddaughter. She hadn't seen her grandfather in nearly 10 years, not since the day she left Dust Creek with her mother. And now she was back, summoned by the news of his death, too late for apologies, too late for anything. She stared at the wooden coffin resting on 2 sawhorses, the kind of humble send-off Will would have insisted on. No preacher, no choir, just the dry wind and a few stories from ranchers who'd ridden beside him. The only thing louder than the silence in her chest was the question thudding behind her ribs. Why had he sent for her? The letter had arrived 3 days before Will died. Scrawled in his shaky handwriting, it said only, Ella, I reckon I don't have much time. There's something here you need to see. Come home. Will. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even apologetic. But it was the first thing she'd gotten from him in a decade. And despite the bitterness she'd swallowed all these years, after he sent her mother away, after he refused to visit when her mother fell ill, after he cut them both off, Ella had come. Part of her had hoped to confront him, ask the questions that haunted her at night. Now, she would never get the chance. After the short ceremony, folks wandered off, murmuring to one another as they drifted toward trucks and waiting horses. Ella remained. She knelt beside the coffin, fingers touching the edge of the pine box. You were supposed to tell me, she whispered. You had no right to leave things like this. Behind her, footsteps crunched. Sheriff Amos Reed, tall and slow-moving, with eyes like dull copper, came to stand beside her. He'd been Will's friend since before Ella was born. He wrote that letter to you the same day he collapsed in the barn, Amos said, voice low. He knew he was dying. Ella didn't look up. And he waited until then? Amos shrugged. Will never did anything before he was damn well ready. She rose to her feet. He still owed us answers. He didn't know anything, Ella. But maybe he left you something anyway. Amos paused. The horse. Midnight. He's been gone for 2 days. Took off after Will passed. Wouldn't let nobody near him. Ella frowned. You think he knew? Animals know more than we give him credit for. The sheriff squinted at the distant hills. He was Will's only real companion for the last 7 years. They understood each other. Her eyes drifted toward the trail that wound out of Dust Creek into the wide, broken land beyond. If he's out there, he'll come back. Maybe. Or maybe he's just doing what we used to do when the weight got too heavy, disappearing for a while. The next day passed in a blur. Ella stayed in the ranch house, the one she barely remembered, with creaking floorboards, faded photographs, and dust coating the furniture like grief. She walked the old corral, found Will's saddle still hanging on the rail, his tools laid out just so in the shed. Everything smelled like leather and old wood and sweat, like the life of a man who spoke more to horses than people. Inside the barn, she saw Midnight's empty stall, the hay untouched. A rope bridle hung neatly on the hook. Will's journal lay on a workbench, open to a blank page. But the previous entry caught her eye. It was dated 2 days before his death. Midnight's grown restless. He watches the horizon like he's waiting for someone. Maybe it's her. Maybe I should have done more. But I kept too many things locked away. She deserves the truth. Asterisk. Ella read the words twice, then closed the book. She wanted to scream at him, at his silence, at his stubbornness, at the way he left without explaining anything. But she also felt the tears welling, fierce and unwanted, because part of her, the part she thought had long since dried up, still missed the old man. That night, she stood on the porch under a sky full of stars. Dust Creek slept. The wind carried the scent of juniper and the distant creak of crickets. And then hoofbeats. She straightened, every muscle alert. From the shadows, something moved. A black figure stepped into the moonlight, tall and silent as a ghost. Midnight. He came slowly, head bowed, mane tangled. His eyes were rimmed with sorrow. But he walked with purpose, crossing the yard without hesitation. Ella didn't move. She barely breathed. Midnight stopped just a few feet away and stared at her. Something passed between them, recognition maybe. Not of who she was, but of who Will had been to both of them. He lowered his head toward her, nostrils flaring gently. She stepped forward, laying a hand on his muzzle. His skin was warm, alive, present, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt something other than loss. Midnight let out a soft huff. Then, without warning, he turned and walked past her, heading toward the house. No reins, no lead. Ella followed, heart pounding. Whatever Will had left unsaid, Midnight might carry it still. And Ella knew one thing for sure. She wasn't leaving until she found out what it was. The morning sun cracked over the ridge, spilling gold across the parched fields as Ella stepped outside with a blanket draped around her shoulders. Midnight stood in the corral, motionless except for his tail swishing at flies. He hadn't tried to leave, hadn't shied away from her. It was as if he'd been waiting for her all along. She leaned on the fence and watched him. He was older than she remembered from the photo on her mother's dresser, but no less magnificent. Muscled, dark, and proud, with a fire still smoldering in his eyes. This horse had carried her grandfather through the final chapter of his life. Now, for some reason, he was here, calm, grounded, as if tethered not by rope, but by memory. Ella knew nothing about training horses. She had spent her years in the city, in bookstores and classrooms, trying to outrun the hollowness left by her family's silence. But something about Midnight made her feel like maybe she didn't have to know everything. Maybe she just had to listen. Inside the barn, she found another letter tucked inside Will's toolbox, folded neatly, her name written in a firm but fading hand. Ella, asterisk, I never did right by you or your mama. I reckon I've run out of time to fix that proper, but there's one thing left I hope you'll see through. Midnight won't let just anyone ride him. Only trusts those who've got the right heart. If he chose to stay, maybe it means you've got more of me in you than I feared. If he leads you to the canyon, go with him. There's something there he's meant to show you, asterisk. Your granddad, Will. She read the letter 3 times, then folded it, hands trembling slightly. Midnight had returned on his own, and now he was waiting again, like he knew this message, this mission, wasn't complete. A canyon. She hadn't heard of any canyon in the area, but then again, she hadn't known much about her grandfather's world at all. By noon, she stood in the yard, a saddle draped awkwardly over her arm. Midnight watched as she approached, ears twitching, but he didn't back away. She moved slowly, heart pounding in her ears, and raised the saddle. He let her place it. No bucking, no flinch, just a slow, deep breath, as if granting permission. Her inexperience was obvious. The stirrup leather slipped through her fingers twice. She cinched the girth too tight, then too loose. Midnight waited, patient as stone. When she finally climbed into the saddle, gripping the horn for balance, he shifted his weight, but didn't move until she said the word. Go. He turned toward the open hills, without hesitation. They rode for an hour in silence. The wind carried the scent of dust and juniper, and Ella's thighs ached from muscles and used to riding. But she didn't complain. She let Midnight choose the path, trusting the quiet certainty in his steps. The land stretched vast around them, old and dry, dotted with brittle brush and sandstone ridges. As the hills gave way to rocky terrain, Ella saw it, a narrow cut in the land, jagged and deep. The canyon, It carved its way into the earth like a scar, almost hidden unless you were searching for it. Midnight stopped at the edge and snorted. She dismounted, legs trembling slightly, and led him to a cluster of boulders. There, beneath a flat rock, was a small wooden box, worn and weathered, almost buried by time. Inside, a stack of papers, old photos, and a metal medallion hanging from a leather cord. She picked up a photo. It was of her mother, no older than 20, smiling as she sat on a horse. Midnight, younger but unmistakable, stood beside her, proud but reserved. Another photo showed a tiny Ella perched in Will's arms, looking at her full. A lump rose in her throat. The papers were deeds, maps, and a letter addressed again to her. Asterisk if you're reading this, then Midnight did his part. This land, these hills, this canyon, they're yours now. I bought it years ago, thinking I'd build something for your mama and you. But I never did. Let the past die, Ella. Let it turn into something better, asterisk. Asterisk forgiveness ain't weakness. It's strength, asterisk. She lowered the letter slowly, overwhelmed. The wind picked up, rattling the leaves. Midnight stepped forward, nudging her shoulder gently. She turned to him, eyes glassy. You knew, she murmured. You knew he left this for me. He snorted softly and lowered his head. It wasn't affection exactly. It was more like acknowledgement, recognition. She stayed there until the shadows stretched long across the canyon rim. Then she tucked the box into her saddlebag and mounted again. Midnight moved with calm purpose, retracing their path back home. That evening, Ella sat on the porch, a cup of black coffee cradled in her hands. The medallion lay on the table beside her. It was etched with an emblem she didn't recognize, some ranch brand, maybe long defunct, but it felt like a key, a promise. She turned it over slowly, feeling its weight. Sheriff Amos pulled up in his truck, just as the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon. He got out, tipped his hat, and took in the sight of her, the horse grazing nearby, the canyon dust still on her boots. You went where he wanted you to go, he said. She nodded. He left it all for me. I figured as much. He scratched his beard. He always hoped you'd come back. Just didn't know how to say it. He waited too long. Maybe. But you're here now. Ella looked out over the land. It felt different than it had yesterday. Less haunted. More alive. There's a lot I don't know how to forgive. Amos leaned on the porch rail. Start with the horse. He don't carry guilt or pride. Just keeps moving forward. They stood in silence, the night humming around them. And deep inside her, where the wounds had once festered, something began to shift. Not healing. Not yet. But something close. Something like readiness. Tomorrow, she would ride again. Maybe not to chase ghosts, but to see what else the land had to offer. Midnight would lead. And this time, she wouldn't follow blindly. She'd ride beside him. The days stretched into weeks, each one etched with dust, sweat, and a growing bond that neither Ella nor Midnight had expected. At dawn, she saddled him with practiced hands, no longer fumbling with straps or second-guessing her movements. He waited patiently, as always, but now there was something more in his eyes. Trust, maybe, or acceptance. They had become partners. The old trails her grandfather had once ridden unfolded beneath them. Ella found herself memorizing the lay of the land, the crumbling fence posts, the whispering cottonwoods, the rocky slopes where deer often grazed. She began to hear the land, not just see it, and with each ride, it whispered things her grandfather never said. Asterisk, don't leave it behind. Make it something again, asterisk. Back at the house, she pored over the documents Will had left. The land deed was still valid, the canyon untouched by developers. A few of the photographs had notes scribbled in the margins. Spring well here. Cabin foundation, 1952. Fertile pasture, keep wild. She pinned them on the kitchen wall, the map spread below them, tracing her fingers over routes and ideas. Dreams began to root themselves like wild grass. What if she rebuilt the barn? What if she turned the place into a haven, not just for horses, but for herself? But the land wasn't quiet for long. It started with a knock, a sharp rap on the door that broke the morning stillness. Ella opened it to find a man in a polished trucker's jacket, and worn jeans, boots clean and expensive. His name was Darrell Keene, and he carried himself like someone used to getting what he wanted. "You must be Will's granddaughter," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I am. I heard the place changed hands. You planning on doing anything with the canyon?" "That's my business." "Sure," he said lightly. "But see, I was in talks with your grandfather before he passed, about purchasing some of the acreage, particularly the canyon ridge." She narrowed her gaze. "There's no record of that." He shrugged. "We were getting close. He was considering it. I offered good money. You'd get the same offer." "It's not for sale." His smile tightened. "I understand this land has sentimental value, but it's not worth much otherwise. And the ridge, it's got views people would pay for. You'd be smart to think about it." "I have," she said. "It stays in the family." Keene hesitated, then tipped his hat. "Suit yourself. Just remember, folks around here have long memories, especially when it comes to holding up promises." As his truck rumbled down the driveway, Ella felt a chill settle in her chest. The canyon had secrets, ones her grandfather had trusted her to protect. She wasn't about to hand it off to someone like Keene, but his words lingered like dust in the corners of her mind. That night, she took midnight out beneath the stars. The sky was a vault of silver, and the wind carried a dry hush across the fields. She didn't ride far, just to the old sycamore by the fence line. She dismounted and leaned against the trunk, the horse grazing quietly nearby. She spoke into the silence. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know if I belong here." Midnight lifted his head, ears flicking. "But I think he wanted me to find something I couldn't get in the city. Maybe not just peace. Maybe purpose." The horse took a few steps toward her, his muzzle nudging her shoulder. She closed her eyes, letting the weight of everything sink in, the decisions ahead, the roots growing under her feet, the fire beginning to smolder in her chest. The next morning, she drove into town and found Sheriff Amos outside the diner, sipping coffee. "I need your help," she said. He glanced up, squinting into the sun. "With what?" "Making this place mine. Legally, financially. All of it." He nodded slowly. "You're staying then?" "I'm not just staying," she said. "I'm rebuilding." The next few weeks turned into a rhythm of resolve. Ella hired a local carpenter, Ben Morales, to repair the barn. The roof had collapsed in on itself in places, but the bones were strong. Together, they salvaged beams, reset the posts, and built stalls where dust had once settled. She reached out to a local rescue that specialized in abused horses. The woman who ran it, Claire, was in her 50s with wind-chapped cheeks and sharp eyes. "I've got space," Ella said. "Not much, but more than they have." Claire studied her. "You sure about this?" "No, but I feel more sure about this than anything I've done in years." Claire smiled faintly. "That's enough." By the time the first rescue horse arrived, an Appaloosa gelding with a jagged scar over his flank, Midnight watched from the corral. He didn't approach it first, just observed. But that night, Ella found them standing nose to nose in the moonlight, silent and still. The ranch came alive slowly. New fences, clean stalls, hay delivered in bundles that smelled of promise. Ella named the place Red Ridge Sanctuary, after the canyon that had started it all. One morning, as she and Ben hammered the last plank onto the barn doors, Keene returned. This time he didn't smile. "You think a few horses and some paint'll make this place matter?" "It already does," she said. He looked around with distaste. "You'll regret turning down my offer." "Maybe, but I'd regret selling it more." He stepped closer. "This land's not as secure as you think. You're sitting on old water rights, outdated permits. It won't be long before someone finds a crack in your claim." Ella met his gaze evenly. "Then I'll fight for it." "You don't know how." "I'm learning." Keene looked at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away. The dust from his boots didn't reach her porch. That night, Ella stood again by the sycamore. The stars looked the same, but she didn't. Her hands were calloused, her shoulders stronger. Midnight stood beside her, a quiet sentinel. She touched the medallion that still hung around her neck and thought of Will, his regrets, his hopes. the broken pieces of love he'd tried to leave behind like breadcrumbs. She would follow them, not to retrace his steps, but to blaze her own trail. The ranch wasn't finished. The scars hadn't fully healed. But the path forward was clearer now, lined not with fear, but with intention. She whispered into the wind, not as a question, but as a promise. I'm home. The morning sun spilled amber light across the barn as Ella led Midnight from his stall. The air was crisp, not quite winter, but close enough to sting her cheeks. The Appaloosa, now named Jasper, nickered softly from the adjoining paddock, watching them with gentle, curious eyes. Around them, Red Ridge Sanctuary was no longer a dream. It was real, alive, breathing, and growing. But beneath the surface, tension was mounting. Ella wiped her hands on her jeans and opened the mailbox near the front gate. Inside was a thick envelope stamped with legal insignia. Her chest tightened. She already knew who it was from, Keen. His threats hadn't been empty after all. Inside the envelope were documents, a notice of claim, asserting rights to water access from the Eastern Creek, one of her most vital sources. Attached was a complaint about improper infrastructure and alleged neglect of land boundaries. It was strategic, enough red tape to cause delays, legal fees, and headaches, maybe even enough to halt her sanctuary's momentum. She stood in the kitchen staring at the papers as the coffee cooled beside her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. It wasn't just about land. It was about intimidation, chipping away at her resolve one bureaucratic strike at a time. Ben arrived shortly after, toolbox slung over his shoulder. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, setting his gear by the back door. Keen filed a claim, Ella said flatly. He's targeting the water rights. Ben frowned, glancing at the documents. That's low even for him, but not unexpected. I thought he'd back off after our last conversation. Bullies don't stop unless you push back harder. He paused, then added, We can fight this. We'll need a good lawyer, someone local who knows land law. Ella hesitated. Do you know someone? Ben nodded. A woman named Nora Ellis. Tough as they come. Grew up around here, and she's tangled with Keen before. That afternoon, Ella met Nora in her modest office on Main Street. The walls were lined with books and framed photographs of horses, old ranches, and newspaper clippings of past legal victories. Nora adjusted her glasses, flipping through the documents with a seasoned eye. He's fishing. There's no solid ground here, but that won't stop him from dragging this out. So what can we do? Fight it. File a countersuit. I'll need your land deed, water usage logs, and anything you've done to maintain the creek. Pictures, permits, every scrap of paper you've got. Ella nodded, a knot of anxiety loosening ever so slightly. As she left the office, the sky began to darken. Storm clouds gathered over the hills, and a low rumble echoed across the land. Back at the ranch, she fed the horses early, her mind racing through legal terms and possibilities. Midnight stood quietly at her side, his presence grounding her. Looks like we've got a storm coming, she said to him, running a hand down his neck. The wind picked up as the first drops of rain began to fall. She raced to secure the feed, check the fences, and close the barn windows. Thunder cracked overhead, startling Jasper, who kicked at his stall. Ella calmed him with a soft voice, but her own nerves were stretched thin. That night, the storm pounded the roof, rain drumming like a war beat. Ella couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, remembering her grandfather's voice. Asterisk never run from a storm, Ella. You ride through it, asterisk. The next morning, she rose early and went straight to the creek. The banks had swelled, but held firm. She took photos, documenting the healthy flow, the absence of damage, the clear signs of upkeep. She walked the property line, recording everything, even the old markers her grandfather had installed decades ago. Each step was a declaration, I belong here. Days passed. Nora filed the counterclaim and called in a surveyor. Ella organized every record she could find. The tension grew, but so did the support. Claire dropped off hay and left an envelope with $50 inside. Not much, the note read, but enough for a few more nails. Sheriff Amos stopped by to say, Don't let Keen scare you. That ridge has always been Will's, and now it's yours. But Keen wasn't done. A week later, Ella found the fence on the north edge torn down, posts cracked, wire tangled. Tire tracks led away from the damage, deep grooves through the mud. She stood there, fists clenched, heat rising in her chest. Ben arrived minutes later, his truck crunching to a halt. I saw it on my way in. Do you think it was him? I'd bet money on it. They worked silently to repair the damage, replacing the posts, pulling new wire. Each swing of the hammer echoed like defiance. As they worked, Ella spoke through clenched teeth. He's not going to win. No, Ben said. He's not. As the sun set, casting a golden glow across the repaired fence, a truck pulled into the driveway. It wasn't Keen. It was Nora. I've got news, she said, stepping out, her face unreadable. The county judge scheduled a hearing. 2 weeks from now. Keen will be there. Ella's heart thudded. What do I need to do? Just show up. Speak your truth. Bring your photos, documents, the works. I'll handle the law. You handle the land. That night, as the wind rustled the barn roof and the horses settled into their stalls, Ella felt something shift. Fear was still there, but it had been reshaped into resolve. She stood beside midnight under the stars, the same way she had done so many nights before. Only now, there was a flicker of something new in her chest, not just fire, but steel. 2 weeks, she whispered. Let him bring everything he's got. I'm not backing down. The horse pressed his head gently against her shoulder. She smiled faintly, resting her hand against his muzzle. The sanctuary was more than a patch of land. It was memory, legacy, defiance, and hope braided into one. And she wasn't going to lose it. Not without a fight.